And I think that people have been indoctrinated by very bad actors into this, and as a result have excused atrocities, or will make excuses for them, make excuses for the people who do them. I think, in addition, it plays to some of the darkest things of the regional mind, as well as the international mind. The aims of Hamas, their stated aims, include the annihilation of the Jewish people. And October the 7th, they had their best go at doing that. And the fact that in a decision between whether or not you're on the side of the people who want to dance and live in peace with their neighbors, or whether you're on the side of the people who want to rampage through a dance party bar in the early morning, macheting at people, I find it amazing that there are so many people who don't know which side they're on. But there are a lot of them. There are a lot of reasons for that. But one of the foremost reasons is the fact that the state of Israel has been uniquely libeled, has been uniquely lied about. Its history has been uniquely lied about. It has been uniquely put under an international spotlight and then misrepresented in a way which I cannot think of many other countries in the world that have been treated that way. And there are deep reasons for it and shallow reasons for it. The deep reasons include some of the most ancient bigotries of the human heart, and the shallow reasons are people who don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Okay, I think that look, I'm not going to speak for what every person out there believes. I don't exactly agree with like the characterization that there was no outpouring of like feeling after October 7th. And certainly like everybody I know was just like, oh my God, this is like a horrific atrocity. And like an unprecedented terrorist attack from Hamas, the worst terrorist attack in Israeli history against Israelis. And it was horrible. I think what a lot of I'm not arguing that there are no people who are actually pro-Hamas or there are no people who are actually like hate Jews or something like that. I do think that what happens is that a lot of people get put in that category who do not belong there. Much like we've seen this over the last year and a half, where a lot of people, you have John Podhoretz calling Thomas Massie anti-Semitic scum because he said, we're dead broke. We can't afford to fund everybody else's war here. People have been calling Tucker Carlson anti-Semitic all over the place. These are two guys, Thomas Massie and Tucker Carlson, who have never uttered the words "the Jews" in their life. Like they're just not anti-Semites at all. So there's a lot of people, I think, who are, when they're critical of the Israeli government's response to this, get lumped in as pro-Hamas. I will certainly say that's certainly not my position. I think your description of them, death cult, by the way, the same term that Daryl Cooper used to describe Hamas, I think is an accurate one. And it was horrible. But I think that I think that your characterization, first of all, that they gave the Palestinians a state in 2005 is just wrong. I just think that is not at all an accurate way to describe the disengagement, which we could get into more if you want to. But first of all, I would just point out that if the two-state solution was achieved, I assume you're arguing it was taken away after that. You're not still arguing that the Palestinians have a state, or are you saying they have had a state since 2005?
They were given a state in the Gaza.
And when was it taken away?
Well, they kind of screwed up themselves on the 7th of October.
So you're saying from 2005 all the way till October 7th, there was a two-state solution. It had been achieved.
Well, it was another state, yeah.
Oh, okay, that would be two states.
No, it was another state. It was different from the PA.
Okay, right, but I'm saying a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's interesting about that is that this is not how any of the leaders really describe it. I mean, when Netanyahu himself is not claiming that they had already achieved a two-state solution, why are you talking about this? What happened in 2005 in the disengagement was that essentially Israel went from occupying the place to surrounding the place, and they've had it under a brutal blockade since 2007. And yes, you were right.
Why do you think? Why do you? I don't agree the blockade was brutal by any means.
You don't think the blockade of Gaza was brutal?
I mean, how brutal do you think the Egyptians are?
Pretty brutal. Yeah.
They allowed stuff in.
Okay, I mean, since some stuff has gotten in, yes, that's true.
More than some stuff.
Okay,
more than some stuff.
Okay, I'll say this, right, because there's been different levels of blockade even before 2007, going back. I know in 1996, they had like a pretty strong blockade that year. According to the World Bank, it contracted 40% of the GDP of Gaza. So just for reference, the Great Depression was a 30% contraction. This was in 1996. For 1 year, they gave them something worse than our Great Depression. That was just 1 year. From 2007 on, there's been a blockade of that country. You don't think that's kept the country poor?
Why do you think there's a blockade of any kind?
Why is there a blockade? Well, I mean, the argument from Israel would be...
No, why do you think?
I would say, okay, I think that the disengagement, I think Smotrich was correct when he said, I'm sorry, my mistake there. I think which another quote that I'm sure you're familiar with, but Dov Weissglaff, who was the senior advisor to Sharon, was the prime minister at the time. He essentially said the reason we're doing the disengagement, the reason we're doing this is so that we can put the peace process in formaldehyde. This is the reason we're doing it.
You're not answering my question.
Yes,
I'm getting right-wing Israeli politicians. But what do you think is the reason?
I'm getting there. I'm saying, so I think they disengaged in order to kill the peace process. I think they put the full blockade around the country for the reason that they've always kind of done it there, that, yeah, they don't want too much stuff getting in. They want to keep them, as they put it, on a diet, and they don't want rockets to fly into Israel.
The second one is a kind of important one, isn't it? The final
one
you said.
It is.
If the Palestinian leadership in Gaza after 2005 had not, from the get-go, decided to use Gaza as a stockpiling place for rockets to fire into Israel, all of it would be different. If they had just resisted the temptation that so many of us do in our lives to stop keeping RPGs in our cellars and then Katyusha rockets in our children's bedrooms, all of it could have been different. If that desire to live in peace beside your neighbors had superseded the desire to stockpile rockets, it would all be different.
Yeah, or if Israel just hadn't occupied them for 60 years, it would all be different too. I mean, why is it always on them?
Well, you believe in self-determination, I'm sure. Yes.
I believe in individual rights. Yeah, sure.
Okay, individual rights. And that includes the right to make bad decisions. Yes. The Palestinians in Gaza, when they voted in Hamas, made a very bad decision.
Yeah, of course.
And in the years, hang on.
Yes.
And in the years after that, they made bad decision after bad decision. It was a very bad decision to continually fire thousands of rockets into Israel. It was a very bad decision to use what boats came in early on and to use the smuggling networks from Egypt, not to bring in supplies that you could actually build a thriving society with, but to bring in rockets. It was a very bad idea. No, there was not starvation in Gaza after 2005. No, there was no deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of times.
There's no deficit?
No, there are
no
plenty
goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point? Like,
no,
okay.
I find that
lots of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah,
so
but
I
if
don't
you're
know
going to spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
All right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an expert,
well, you have to go and touch the ground.
No, I think you have to. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you spend a career talking about something. Yes, I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country even in passing unless I've at least been there.
Okay,
it's sort of normal. It's a normal thing to do. You're talking about. Hang on, you're talking about crossing points, and not only have you never been to a crossing point in either Egypt or in Israel, but you've never even been to the region.
Okay, again, I think this is a non-argument.
No, it's not a non-argument.
Yeah, it is.
It's not a non-argument. If you're insisting that you're an expert of some kind, or not claiming you're an expert, but still talking about it, about the provisions going into Gaza or not, if you've never seen any of this going on.
So you're not allowed to speak about things that you've read about. You can only speak about things that you've seen with your own eyes.
You can talk about what you want, as you're proving. But that is a different matter from spending an awfully long amount of time talking about an issue in a region you haven't even had the courtesy to visit, whilst developing all of these views about it. I mean, now I slightly get an idea of where you're coming from. You've read about this blockade, and so you imagine that that's what it is. I imagine you've read all the people who say that Gaza was a concentration camp, and you probably think that too. Am I right?
I mean, again, literally a concentration camp. It shares a lot of similarities, I would think.
Wow. Well, as I say, you can't time travel back to the Nazi era.
Let's go back to the blockade.
To the Middle East and actually visit it.
Okay, the World Bank said in 1996 for the 1 year of the blockade.
Quoting the World Bank, I love it.
It doesn't mean anything. This is a non-argument. Yes, I'm saying the World Bank did their own analysis of this, and they said that it was a 40%
your own analysis.
Hold on, you got to stop interrupting and let him finish the sentence.
The World Bank said that 40% drop in the GDP of 1 year due to the blockade, and there's been a blockade from 2007 on. So are you saying that this hasn't had an economic effect? Is that the argument?
No, of course it'll have an economic effect.
So you're saying you have to be on the ground and do an audit of the blockade in order to be able to comment on it?
I think you should at least know what it is, what the territory is, what the situation is in the region. Yes, absolutely.
And the only way to do that is to be there in person.
I think that's the best way. It's not the only way, but it's the best way, for sure. For sure. If you have never seen the countries in question, you've never spoken to the people in question, you've never interviewed anyone, you've never gone around, you've never seen the terrain, and so on, and you've used Wikipedia, I'm sorry, no, that's not the same thing.
Okay, well, I've not just used Wikipedia, but didn't you write a big piece when the war in Ukraine first came out titled something like, I've been to Ukraine and they can win, they can repel the Russians? So you could go there and still get it wrong, right?
No, I was with the Ukrainian armed forces in 2022 when they were retaking territory from the Russians.
Right, the last time they had any advances, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
I said I can see how they could win, which would be advances like that, yeah.
You said if we just fund them, or if we just arm them, that they can then
I said
repel.
that the Ukrainian army was making great successes, which it was when I was with them in the fall of 22.
Okay, listen, there were lots of people who went to Iraq and said we'll be greeted as liberators and we'll be paid for in oil and democracy will spread through the region. So I don't know, either take on the arguments or don't, but I don't think
but your argument's incorrect.
Oh, okay, fine, well then present a counter-argument to it, but to just tell me I'm not alled to talk about something
I'm not saying you're not allowed to talk about it.
Okay, fine, well, you're not an expert, so you shouldn't talk about it. You haven't been there. Yeah, I know, but you keep playing this game where it's like the whole opening to this podcast was like the non-experts talking about this is such a problem. Now you're saying I haven't been there, I can't talk about it. Is there a blockade there that's causing economic devastation or not? According to the World Bank, there is.
First of all, I don't think it's a game. I don't think it's a game at all.
Me neither.
I'm not playing a game. Okay,
but this is semantics.
No, but this is important. I've seen plenty of this up close. I've seen plenty of this with my own eyes because I do believe that one of the things you should do if you're talking about something is to see it.
Yeah, you've established that. Is there a blockade?
The blockade that existed, to the extent it existed, was a blockade to try to make sure that the Israelis and the Egyptians knew what materials were going in and out of Gaza after the first rocket fires, when Hamas, in fact, before Hamas was elected. The Israelis and the Egyptians didn't do a very good job of it, were meant to be trying to make sure that the materials that went into Gaza were not materials that could be used to build up the Gaza and Hamas war machine. The reason why trucks get searched is not because the Israelis want to search through grain or flour. It's because they wanted to stop the trucks containing the arms and the munitions that the Gazan, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad fighters were going to use to fire against Israel. And I'm sorry, it just makes the most obvious strategic sense. As the late great Joan Rivers once said, if as an appeal to authority.
That one I'll allow. That one I like.
She also said that Michelle Obama's a man.
Yeah, I know she did that.
I'm saying she got everything right, so continue. Go ahead.
But as Joan Rivers said, if New York was being rocketed from New Jersey, we would level New Jersey. I don't think you need to level it, by the way. But you would at least try to make sure that rockets weren't being imported in larger quantities into New Jersey.
Of course.
Okay, that's all the Israelis were doing.